is monogamy and is the nuclear family, is that an evolutionary result, or is that more of a society component?
Maybe I've been with my partner 20 years. I didn't know that this was so important to you. Of all the things I do for you in the day, that really fits in your brain as I'm showing love to you. Like, you hear that a lot among couples who've been together for a while. The important part is that you're open to learning. Ask the question. Don't assume that just because your last partner wanted this, that it holds for every partner.
Lots of, I think, curiosity from my end, and kind of just, because when I first came across you, it was through your TED Talk, which is what I...
Okay.
Yeah, it was,
okay, why women have sex.
Exactly, yeah. And it was such a... I think it can be often a taboo subject, but the way that you delivered it was really funny and then also very informative. So I was like, holy cow, this seems like a very cool conversation to have. And I think it probably took me about 3 months to be able to say what your department is. And so I'd love to start there. The Sexual Psychophysiology, kind of what is that, and why is it important?
Yeah, the Female Sexual Psychophysiology Laboratory. There you go. And just as an aside, if I get someone sitting beside me on the plane wanting to know what I do, I just blurt out physiological aspects of, cognitive awareness on behavior, and then they yawn and they don't ask any more questions. So it's great to have such a long, confusing title. But the psychophysiology part of it is we're able to, in my lab, measure actual genital responses during sexual arousal in women. So when I started in this game, I was the only lab in the U.S. doing this, and now many other labs have opened up to be able to study the physiological or genital response of sexual arousal in women.
Yeah, and I when I was first understanding more and more about this subject, it was surprising to understand how the same physiological response can happen between men and women, but then desire doesn't occur. At least this is what I understood from, because I believe you were studying Viagra, and then you were looking at the similarities between men and women, and also the dissimilarities.
That's right, yeah. That's a whole big, interesting area. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, what we find, so I'll just explain how we measure sexual arousal in the laboratory, and this holds true for men and women. We bring the person in, and they're in a room by themselves, so it's all very private and confidential, of course. And for men, they use what is called a penile strain gauge. So it's a device that fits over the penis when it's in a non-aroused state. And then as blood flows into the penis, creates erection, there's expansion on this strain gauge, and that indicates an increase in the size of the penis, which is, of course, highly correlated with blood flow into the penis. In women, we use a device called the vaginal photoplethysmograph. And what this is, it's a small tampon-shaped device that the woman inserts into her vagina. It emits a light into the vagina and measures the amount of backscattered light. So when a woman is aroused, there's more blood in the vagina. It's denser, less light's reflected back, and so we get a pretty accurate measure of how much blood is in the genital tissue. So basically, for genital arousal in men and women, we're talking blood flow into genital tissue. And with women, that's highly correlated with lubrication, because many people don't know this, that how lubrication occurs is there's cells in the lining of the vagina, and when there's enough blood in there, it squeezes the lubrication out. It doesn't come from a gland inside the vagina. So there's cells that line. So that's the genital response in men and women and how we measured in the lab. And so the typical scenario is they would come in and we show a non-sexual film, like a travel film, and just to measure their baseline amount of blood in their genital tissue. And that lasts maybe 3 or 5 minutes. And then immediately we show a sexual film. And the films we use for women are by women directors, so they're a little bit I don't know, they're not just immediate shots of genitals. Like men are very visual. They want the, physical shots immediately. Women tend to like a little bit of a plot in the sexual stimuli. So we show films that have been previously demonstrated to increase sexual arousal in women and not cause negative affect or anything like that. And then, so what you have is you have a measure of how much blood is in their genitals in a non-sexual state, and then how much blood is in their genitals when they're sexually aroused to the sexual videos. And we look at that change. So the increase from a non-aroused to an aroused state. And then usually you have several sessions. So depending on what you're studying, if you're doing a drug, you would do that in a drug scenario, and then a second session in with the placebo, and look to see how that change score differs. So what we find, getting back to a big way that men and women differ in their sexual response, is when we do that with men and we bring them in and we measure their genital arousal and we ask them, how aroused are you to this film? And sometimes we ask with a questionnaire afterwards, or sometimes, like in my lab, we've developed a device where they can monitor with basically a computer mouse that's fed into a program that gives us moment-by-moment changes in what they're saying on how aroused they are or turned off. And so we can look at how what their penis is doing compared to what's going on in their head, how aroused they're feeling, right? And in men, we find, and this is not just my study, this is many studies across the literature, there's a very high correlation. Like you get about 0.9 correlation between the strength of their erection and how aroused they say they are. Okay, so very close connection. In women, we don't get that. We get about 0.23. There's a big meta-analysis, a review of the whole literature that showed you get about 0.23. So what this means is when blood flows into the genitals of women, for some women that's very meaningful to their experience of sexual arousal, and they say, yes, I'm aroused. But many women don't even notice the change, and many women notice it, but it's not as important to their overall experience of arousal. Many more contextual factors, for example, come into play. And so you were mentioning that this has something to do with Viagra. And what it has to do with Viagra is, if you recall, Viagra was introduced in 1998 by Pfizer, and instant phenomenal success. I mean, it made billions in the first year, or $1 billion in the first year, I should say. And so the timing for me was pretty good because I joined UT in 1998.
Oh, perfect.
And at that time, no one was funding sex research. I knew that going into it. The NIH is not going to fund. The big federal agencies aren't going to fund women's sexuality research. And now all of a sudden, because Viagra was so successful, people were saying, well, what about women? What about the pink Viagra? What's going to be for me? There's already a difference in sex drive between men and women, and now you're going to make that even worse, And so all of a sudden, all of the drug companies started into the race to develop the first pink Viagra. And so here I am, a new professor, at UT, and what do I know? I'm assistant professor trying to set up my lab, and I'm being approached by all these drug companies. Can you run our initial trials for Viagra in women? Which was a phenomenal opportunity, and it was only because I was, the only one who had a sexual psychophysiology being set up at that time. So we did the studies, and what we found is Viagra. Now, how Viagra works, it's through a really brilliant mechanism of nitric oxide acting on genital tissue. So it opens up the blood vessels so that blood can flow into the penis and stay there. And, men and women are developed in the womb from the same primordial tissue. Like they have, little blobs that develop different ways. And for the men, it develops into the penis, and the swelling develops into the scrotum. And for women, it develops into the clitoris and the labia. So you got the same tissue, just formed differently. And so there's no reason to think that the nitric oxide isn't going to work on genital tissue in women the same way as it does for the penis in men. So we do the studies, and what do we find is that, wow, yes, there's more blood flow into the tissues of women with Viagra compared to placebo. But what we didn't find, which we found in men, which is when they took Viagra and the blood flowed into their penis, they said, I'm aroused and I want to have sex. So it affected both arousal and their drive or their motivation to want to have sex. In women, what we found is that blood flowed into their genitals, but some of them didn't say they were more aroused. So that connection between the genitals and wanting to have sex or feeling turned on wasn't there. Not for everybody, but when we do this type of research, we look at averages, mean responses, and across the board, it didn't happen for women. So bit by bit, everybody withdrew from developing this type of drug for women.
Yeah, that's an incredible full-length explanation. And so many.
Sorry.
No, that was amazing. And I'm just thinking in my head, so many interesting applications, and I'd like to go in two different routes, which I think is helpful for men to understand, like how to improve their sex their sex with their partnership, and then also just understanding. Maybe we go here first on how, if a woman finds herself having sexual dysfunction, is that a physical stimulation thing, or is that a psychological thing?
Yeah, well, if we knew the answer to that, we'd all be curing sexual dysfunction. The short answer is it's hugely variable between women, and there are so many factors. So, and when we talk about dysfunction, there's different types of dysfunction, right?
Yeah.
The three main ones are low desire, and desire we like to think of as motivation, the motivation to engage in sex, right? So it's the drive that moves you forward. Arousal, on the other hand, is when you're already in a sexual situation. Are you psychologically aroused? Are you into it? Are you turned on, or are you laying there making grocery lists and waiting for it to be over, right? And then genitally, the response I just described, blood in the genitals, and for women also lubrication. So some women have problems just with arousal. And then we have orgasm problems, which are, an inability to have an orgasm. So there are three different sexual dysfunctions. There's often coexistence between them, but they're caused by different things, and they're treated differently. So, like, for example, orgasm in women, a lot of women are unable to have an orgasm through penetration. But they're able to have an orgasm through masturbation, and they think, "Oh, what's wrong with me?"
Yeah.
And this goes back to Freud. Thank you very much, for messing up women for centuries, where he conceptualized women who or orgasms that were attained through clitoral stimulation as being infantile orgasms, and the real womanly orgasm was vaginal orgasms. And so he built this notion that there were two different types of orgasms, and that the fully mature or developed orgasm was through penetration. Well, Masters and Johnson took it to the laboratory, showed us that there's really no difference physiologically between the two. And then...
Surprise.
Yeah. And then some super interesting research. Actually, Marie Bonaparte, who was the, I think, niece or great niece of Napoleon, she was a... I think she was a physician in Freud's time, and she was very distressed by the fact that she couldn't have vaginal orgasms. And she took it upon herself to measure with women. She had the notion that it was the distance between the clitoris and the vagina. And so she actually measured the distance in a lot of her female patients, had this data, and the poor woman had surgery to place her clitoris closer to the opening of the vagina to try to have vaginal orgasms. Okay, so what's interesting here is, like, let's jump ahead, to current day. Kim Wallen from Emory University at his lab got hold of that data that in the day, very unsophisticated statistics were done, reanalyzed it, and sure enough, drew the conclusion that women who have their clitoris positioned very close to the entry of the vagina are more likely to have vaginal orgasms. Why? Because they're getting clitoral stimulation. Yeah. Okay, so I know I'm going off on this whole big tangent, but in terms of orgasm, how we treat orgasm in women, it's never, with the exception of, severe nerve damage or some pretty serious health issues, we've never found anything physiologically wrong with women who are unable to have an orgasm. So it's generally believed that they're just not getting the right type of stimulation, or they haven't learned how to have an orgasm. So in some ways, orgasm problems, and not in some ways, in many ways, orgasm problems are the easiest to fix. You teach the woman how to pleasure herself and to learn what's pleasurable to her, and then get her to incorporate that into her sexual scenario. Arousal problems, the genital side of things, are physiological. It's lack of blood flow into the genitals that has to do, a lot with hormones, and as they change across the lifestyle. And then desire is the killer hard one. The Lauman et al. Study, which was done in 1995 out of the University of Chicago, was a massive survey of American men and women, and they found overall huge age range they studied from, I think, 18 to 80, was that about a third of American women reported that they had little interest in sex over the past year. So that's a pretty high percentage, much higher than what you see in men, which in that study was around 14%.
And this was, you said, in 85?
95.
95, excuse me. And
94 or 95, I think.
And did those participants, were they in relationships, or did it not take that into consideration?
Yes, they were in relationships. Yeah.
And I'm asking, and then thinking of this, of another thing that I was learning from your book, and then another podcast that I heard you on, which is, yes, sex and desire for women is so much more contextual based. Mm-hmm. And so there are a plethora of non-sexual activities that go into the actual lead up of desire, and some examples that you were giving were walking on the beach, holding the hand, I think one of the sexiest activities is like doing the dishes, right?
Right.
When you hear that as a man, you're kind of like, what? Like, because it is pretty basic in terms of the stimulation that it would take for a man to then be aroused for desire, but then the contextual base for women is much different.
Exactly. I mean, women are more distractible when it comes to sex. They're more aware of their surroundings. So actually, again, in Kim Wallen's lab, they did some eye tracking studies where they showed men like a potentially sexual scenario where there's where it seemed like there was going to be sex happening, a photograph, and they tracked their eye movements of what they were looking at in the picture. And then they did the same with women. And in men, what you see is they go to the breasts, to the genitals, breast, genitals, breast, genital. Mm-hmm. Women are looking everywhere, trying to figure out what's going on in the picture. Is this conducive to a good sexual situation? Trying to figure it out.
Not even just the person itself, but getting maybe what are the clues outside of
Exactly. Wow. Trying to fit it into almost like a sexual story, and then decide whether it is worthy of being sexually aroused too.
It's super interesting, because that makes me think of modern day dating profiles, and how if a guy would want to maybe communicate, I imagine this is like a high level of status, is take a picture in front of a Lamborghini or something, or like on a penthouse.
People do that all the time. Absolutely. Cues to status and power are very sexually arousing to women. We could talk about that from an evolutionary perspective.
That'd be fascinating, yeah.
Whereas for women, there are certain cues, undoubtedly, that women are attracted to in men. Tall, lean, tall, muscular, V-shaped torso, a good square jaw. All these, from an evolutionary perspective, trigger good genes. And so, if you follow evolutionary theory, those are the triggers for sexual desire in women. But also, yes, things like are they good caretakers? Are they gonna focus on the emotional side, not just the physical side of sex?
And does a woman's desire for the type of man change based off of her ovulation stage?
Oh, well, there is some research suggesting yes. So in women who are not on hormones, of course, so they're naturally cycling across the cycle, and we know that mid-cycle estrogen peaks, testosterone also peaks, which is related to sexual drive in men and women. And there is some evidence from studies that women report higher levels of desire, drive, during ovulation, and that they're more likely to have sexual affairs, and that they're more likely to be attracted to men who fit this sort of high status, sometimes the bad boys instead of the cads, I should say, instead of the dads. There's this swing to being more attracted to those guys who may not be the ones who are going to stick around, help raise the children, but you're going to get those good genes.
That's so fascinating.
I know. It really is.
It really is. Yeah. No, and you're talking about kind of how the evolutionary biology component of how desire builds, and then how does that differ between men and women?
How is desire different between men and women?
Or I guess how do I frame it correctly? The attraction, like how does our attraction towards a potential mate differ between men and women?
Yeah. Okay. That's a big topic. Well, how about I answer that from an evolutionary perspective?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Because that's where most of the research in that field comes from. So evolutionary psychologists, and by evolution, I'm just talking about change across time. But when you're talking evolutionary theory, you're talking change over thousands and thousands of years, right? And of course, Darwin was the kind of grandfather of evolutionary theory, and most people associate him with survival of the fittest or natural selection, this idea that we're programmed to survive, and we survive by adapting to our environments, and hence all the variability between species. Darwin looked at the little finch with all different types of beaks, right, studied on the Galapagos, and concluded that their beaks were very well suited to the type of food that was available in that particular environment. So the notion here is over thousands of years, species diversify to be able to fit with their environment. Okay, so that's natural selection, what we usually think of evolutionary theory. But then where the sexual part comes in is Darwin was, I don't know if he was looking at a peacock or studying a peacock or whatever, but a peacock was in his mind, and he's looking at this bird, and it's the male birds that have that plumage, right? And he's like, well, what the heck, you stupid bird? You're flapping all those brightly colored feathers and just crying out to be eaten by a predator, right?
Yeah,
and
what are you doing?
This doesn't make sense with evolutionary theory. And from that, he developed this sexual selection theory. And what that is, it's not just that we're programmed with a need to survive. We're programmed with a need to survive to pass on our genes, so that it's not just our lifetime we're talking about. We want our genetic material, our DNA, to go on to future generations, right? So from that, what we're talking about then, to be able to pass along our DNA, we have to be successful at mating, right? We have to reproduce. And because there are vast differences in reproductive biology between men and women. This leads to different sexual strategies for men and women. Now, by that I mean, so women are born, well, in terms of passing along our DNA and having offspring, women are very limited, right? They are born with the number of eggs they will have in their lifetime. They become fertile, at puberty, or oftentimes a few cycles after puberty, until menopause, so a very short reproductive window compared to men who have endless amounts of sperm and can reproduce from the time they reach puberty and develop viable sperm until pretty much when they die. So wide reproductive window. And so women are limited in that regard. They're limited in the sense that pregnancy is 9 months, and then they have to care for the young. Humans are very dependent for many years before they can survive on their own. So all of this means that women in their entire lifetime can have very few offspring, right? Men, on the other hand, can have many, many offspring. And so if you think of it this way, what do women need to do to maximize the chances that they're going to have offspring that survive with their DNA? Well, you want to have healthy offspring. You want to make sure they're going to survive. And so from this sense, they're attracted to men who physically have cues that suggest they have good underlying genes, genetic makeup, strong genetic makeup. And for example, when we talk about the women are attracted to men with a very masculine, strong jaw, when men go through puberty, their face changes, the bones in the men's face change under the influence of testosterone. And to create those uber masculine features, you need a lot of testosterone. Well, a lot of testosterone compromises the immune system, okay? So it's like it's only the men who have a really strong immune system who are able to tolerate so much testosterone to develop those masculine characteristics in their face. So in this sense, that masculine face is signifying underlying good quality genes, a good immune system, and that's good mating potential because the woman's child will inherit those good quality genes, and that will maximize the chances of survival. So, thinking of it from this sense, it's like, okay, that means there are sexual strategies that differ between men and women. If you ask the question, how many children, if a woman slept with 100 men in a year, let's just do it this way. If a woman slept with 100 men in a year, how many offspring could she have?
One.
Yeah, one and a third, right?
Yeah,
Maybe, but one, one.
Pretty much.
Now, if a man slept with 100 women in a year, how many children could he have?
There's no limit.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's unlikely he would have 100. He would have to hit them all at their reproductive cycle.
Stage, yeah.
But it's possible, right? So this leads to very different sexual strategies if all we're talking about is maximizing the chances that your DNA is going to survive you. So for men, this means to have sex with lots of different partners, not invest terribly in any one partner. And for women, it means picking men who, number one, have good quality genes, so the few children they can produce will survive. And number two, trying to find a partner who will stick around, provide resources to help rearing the young. And all this leads to what makes sense for sexual desire. Well, this means that men would benefit from a high sex drive to get them out there, have lots of sex with lots of partners. And it would benefit women to have a lower sex drive so they can be careful consumers of sex. They have to be very careful with who they're going to mate with because pregnancy is costly. And I'm talking evolutionarily when there wasn't birth control or, Sex meant getting pregnant most of the time, and that's a costly resource on their body.
When it comes to this in the context of the strategy component, so the biological component, there's often debate on if body count matters, and so I'm curious if these strategies play a point in terms of like a person's body count. Whereas I think this is a point of contention that exists in today in society, where it's like, hey, people can have sex with whoever they want, and it's not anyone's place to judge another person. Which I think those could be two separate things. Is that component, and then I'm curious, from this other angle, is there any, I guess, information on the sexual strategy or the passing on the gene strategy that plays into that discussion?
So by body count, you mean number of sexual partners?
Yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, this is just one strategy, and I'm giving the very basics of evolutionary theory. But and also, we've evolved big frontal cortexes, so we make decisions, and it's not like men just want sex; they want to be in a partner, they want to bond, and certainly in current day, there's lots of advantages to pick a partner, if not for lifetime, for serial monogamy. Serial monogamy is beneficial, So this is just one small little underpinning of what might be going on that tells us that there are certainly, however you want to measure sex drive, the literature shows that men have a higher sex drive than do women. And this is one explanation for why, for this sexual strategy, that it is more likely to propel them to have many sexual partners, and it's more likely to make women careful consumers. And so being a careful consumer of sex means you got to look at your environment. You got to assess the situation to make sure it's a good situation to have sex.
Yeah. Have you seen it evolve from when you started studying this topic until today?
Well, certainly, the whole how people find mates changed, of course. All the online dating, all the hooking up, it's a very different pattern than even 30 years ago. But we still see, even in those contexts, the gender difference holds true. If you ask men, and there have been studies asking men what they hope to get from hooking up, and they ask women what they hope to get from hooking up, and it's not across the board. There's huge variability, but on average, you get more women who say they're hoping to find a long-term relationship. And in men, and again, this isn't to say a lot of men aren't looking for a long-term relationship, but there are more men who say they're hoping to have more sex, and maybe they'll meet someone who introduces them to friends so they can have sex with their friends. So that motivation is still there. It's just in a different modern-day context.
Have you seen it evolve with someone's age? So I guess with myself, I've had that same, script in my head, like, I want to have a partner in my life to have more sex, but then I sat with it a little bit more, and it was like, actually what I am craving more is intimacy, which isn't just sex. There's more to it, and so I'm curious if there's I'm sure, like, generally speaking, does this change with age?
I think it does. I mean, certainly we know hormones change with age, and testosterone plays an important role in sex drive for both men and women. And certainly from age 20, testosterone levels start to decline. So maybe that takes away some of the...
Men and women?
Men and women, yes. Now, men start at way higher levels than women, so they have a long way to go before it ever would impact ability to attain an erection. That's very, very low testosterone levels. But yes, we know testosterone is key to sex drive in men and women, and it declines with age. And so particularly, I think, with men, if there's less testosterone, there's probably this less pressure for sex to be genital focused and more to be about connection and emotional attachment. I mean, in my research with David Buss on why women have sex, we found that the top reasons were because they were attracted to the person, because they were in love, and because they wanted the emotional connection. And those were the three reasons for both men and women. So it's not like women were the only ones who were wanting to have sex for emotional attachment. That's not the case at all.
How has this been studying all of this and then relating it to your own life? Has that been a journey in itself? What was your experience like that?
No, you know, people ask me that, but it's just a totally different thing for me. It's science is all in the lab, and and then there's my own private life. I mean, certainly I learn things, so I know what's going on in my life and with my partner, and how to explain it and how to change it if need be. But yeah, I can't say it's had a major impact, strangely. I guess it's almost like I'm using a different part of my brain.
Yeah. It's totally separate.
Yeah.
And then they exist simultaneously.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very interesting. Another thought that came to my head as you were describing the evolutionary background was on the benefit towards a monogamous relationship. And I'm curious, like, is that, like, now understanding, like, the sexual strategy for men is to have sex with as many partners, or one of the strategies is monogamy, and is the nuclear family, is that an evolutionary result, or is that more of a society component?
I think it's more of a society component. I think, just as we've evolved as humans, our needs have evolved, and there are benefits to having a partner. I mean, it's expensive to have many, many women that you're supporting. Not many men can afford that. Yeah. And I mean, there are lots of non-monogamous men and women out there, and they make it work. And there's polygynous societies, and but yes, I think monogamy has evolved to have its benefits that certainly suit current day living conditions and costs and what have you.
Yeah, it's a symptom
just
of
to raise children,
Yeah, because a kid is the most expensive thing that you'll do is have a kid.
Yes,
essentially. Yeah.
yes.
Thanks, mom and dad.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but it's so interesting, because I know there seems to be a departure from the nuclear family a lot, or at least from what I've in my 30 years here on Earth, or at least maybe that's just my perception on life. And so, I came from my mom and dad who are still together, and I want a family. This is what I tell myself, but I'm like 30 and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not taking the action to have a family. And so it's just an interesting, like, change of behaviors that I'm noticing. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to comment on that, or.
So you want to have that, but you're not ready to go there yet.
I want to have a family. Like, that's what I say. But now, as we were talking before we started recording, as I'm traveling like crazy, and I'm thinking, like, man, no girl is gonna want to be with me if I'm hopping from like Indonesia to Texas to Istanbul to all of this.
It could be good.
I'll put a couple feelers out there, but it's so interesting, because I don't know. It seems that. I remember looking at and seeing friends when they had kids and they were like 24, and I was at the time, I was like, what in the fuck are you guys doing? But now I'm looking at it too, and I was like, wow, okay, that's actually pretty beautiful. Like, you'll be young with your kids. Which is like, man, one of my favorite memories is with my uncle, and he's just playing baseball with all of us and the kids, and he's kicking our ass, and I'm like an 18-year-old kid. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I did not have that experience. In fact, my mother was almost 50 when I was born.
Wow.
If you can imagine.
Wow.
And so it was like I grew up with these weird old parents who were
It's pretty cool. A calm household, I imagine. More like maybe not so
No,
much.
I wouldn't say calm. It was a little dysfunctional. But my sister, was 25 years older than me, so she was
Oh,
married
wow.
with 2 kids by the time I came along. So I basically grew up an only child with
Wow.
a mother who was very strict Catholic and a father who was atheist. So that didn't work so well.
That is such an interesting combo. How did they make it work? That's
My God,
what's the
I don't know. I mean, I guess they made it work, but
Yeah.
I think it was because my mother was Catholic. She would never divorce him,
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
yeah, my mother would drag me to mass every Sunday, the 8:30 mass, because the 10 o'clock mass was for sinners, so you had to get up for Jesus kind of thing. And so I'd go to church with my mother, and then I'd come home, and my dad would be sitting at the kitchen table drinking his coffee and reading the newspaper. And
Hey, ladies.
like clockwork, I'd walk through the mudroom door, and my father would peer at me over his reading glasses and say, "So, Cindy, what kind of bullshit did they feed you today?" Like, I don't know the right answer.
You're playing the
I
middle
don't
woman
know.
between the two. Yeah, like, Dad, come on, don't make me answer that. It's amazing. So, what ended up getting you into this this field of study? Like, how did you find this, and then what are the steps that led you to here?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a hard question to answer. The reason I'm humming on and hawing on it is because I remember one of my girlfriends from graduate school, just out of the blue one day, she says to me, "I know why you went into sex research." And I'm like, "Really? Why?" And she goes, "To get back at your mother." And I'm like, "What?" And she said, "Well, yeah, like the worst thing you could be was a prostitute, but you're too smart for that. So the next worst thing is a sex researcher." And I'm like,
amazing.
"Oh, wow. I don't think so, but who knows what
knows,
are
yeah.
all the underlying motivations." No, my parents didn't even actually ever find out what I did do. I was working for a totally different area in fashion, merchandising, and design, and just decided to take a night school course in psychology out of general interest at the University of British Columbia. I was living in Vancouver, Canada at the time, and found it phenomenally interesting. And it was taught by a professor who was a biopsychologist who studied rat sexual behavior. So I was introduced to the field of sex research. At that time, I had no idea that sex was studied in a laboratory. It was like amazing to me and shocking and interesting.
Completely.
And so I decided I'd take some more psychology courses and do an undergraduate degree in psychology while I was still working. So I did night school classes Monday to Thursday night, 7 to 10. And in the process, got involved in working in this professor's lab. It did like the equivalent of an honors paper. And in the process of doing that research, learned that there really wasn't anyone studying women's sexuality since Masters and Johnson. It's not to say no one wasn't studying sex. There were a few rat researchers, one primate researcher, but no one was interested in the biology of women's sexuality, probably because no one was funding it. It was hard to do research. I thought, I got to do this.
Yeah, here we go.
And here we go. Yeah.
No, it's so incredible because one is it was really cool to read you were named as one of the most influential women in the world, and I think it was in 2016.
By the BBC.
Yeah,
that was a really nice honor.
Really, really amazing, and I think the because I did the audiobook of Why Women Have Sex, and it was it was another enjoyable piece of work that you put out, like the speech you gave, and I think what I think folks and myself included didn't understand is before you there essentially was no research done on women and sexual function, and I think one of the coolest things from that is it was like over 200 reasons for
237 to be exact,
reasons why women have sex, and like I think that it's so it was super helpful for me just to listen to and just think, okay, this is how I could be a better partner when it comes to sexual intimacy, is like it's all of these things outside of it. And then I think one thing I was reflecting on is how much does emotional safety play a role in a couple's sexual or good sexual connection.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a really good and important part, and that is sex isn't just about sex. It's intimacy, and sex is just one aspect of intimacy. And intimacy, broadly defined, is what makes us feel connected to another human. It makes us feel loved, and it makes us feel secure. And so how do we experience intimacy? And in my lab, we've actually developed an intimacy scale. We're in the process of writing it up. But we asked many, many people, what leads you to feel intimate in a relationship? And we compiled all these answers and then developed, a questionnaire that's, I think, could be helpful to give to couples as a checklist, just to learn about each other. And so, yes, for some people, intimacy was about having sex, it was kissing, but others, it's holding hands, it's cuddling, it's watching a movie together, it's laughing together, it's having your partner ask you about your day and showing genuine interest. It's being, interested in your friends and your family and wanting to learn about your past. It's truly like absorbing the other person and wanting to be a part of their life and know what makes them happy, know what makes them sad. Having your partner be proud of you, is a good feeling. All of these things play a role in feeling connected to a person, and feeling connected to a person is going to enhance the sexual experience. And for many women, it's essential for drive. I mean, for men too. I don't mean to portray men as just these cavemen who just want to have sex all the time with many women. I don't mean that at all. So, I think in any relationship, it's so important to have a conversation and ask them, what makes you feel intimate? Because, could you answer that question about someone? I mean, you'd probably get many things right, but you'd probably learn some things that you never thought about, like when they, when they wave to you as they pull out of the driveway, that's an act of intimacy and connectedness that it takes 2 seconds in your life, but it all adds up to feeling I'm connected to this person and I want to be with this person. And
it's really, really cool and interesting. I can't wait to get that checklist and read it, because it's just bringing awareness to this. And I think in that same thread, if there is a man who's listening and maybe his partner isn't having the most amount of sexual satisfaction, what cues could they look for outside of maybe verbal ones?
Yes. So I think it's important to keep in mind that when it comes to what makes you want to have sex, men are very visual. Visual cues are super important. So in some ways, it's very easy for a female partner to make a man partner want to have sex, because you just give them some visual cues, and
doesn't take much.
But now men are the ones that have the harder task. And so it's going to be different for every woman. So this is why communication is so key, to talk to your partner about what makes you feel loved and secure and makes you want to be intimate with me. And that may mean going out somewhere special, getting out of that same environment that there's so many cues of things that I have to do, and I have to do the wash, and I have to feed the dog, and my clothes are on the floor. Like, all these things are distractors for women. So for some women, getting them out of that distracting environment, putting them somewhere new, where they don't have to make dinner, they don't have to do the dishes, taking them out. Sexual variety is key for men and women to keep sexual sexual relationships alive. So do something out of the ordinary. Don't just watch Netflix or a movie at home. Go for a hike, go for a walk somewhere, go to a comedy show. Newness for men and women can really be arousing and beneficial to a relationship. And in terms of you're sharing a new experience together, you feel connected, and that connectedness will translate into feeling intimate, and that in turn sometimes leads to wanting to have sex. So yes, for men, it's a lot of it's going to involve communication, talking, and I know that's not always easy, but you can start with something like this checklist I'm talking about, but you can just simply say to each other, let's both write down 10 things that make us feel connected to each other. And then share your lists and see if you understand each other's lists. And you might learn something important about each other, and that you can incorporate in the day, so that when it comes to nighttime and maybe the time you have sex, you will already have put lots of things in the intimacy bank. So the context is good, the setting is good. And that it's not just, crazy day at work for both of us, and we're frazzled and we're home and tired and stressed and the house is a mess. And okay, let's have sex. Well, it's just one more thing I got to do.
Yeah, it's the duty sex.
The duty sex, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, no, I think back to it. It's super helpful. And I think back to a relationship that failed because I had understood the intimacy what I understood as the intimacy that I should deliver was not at all what I should be giving. Whereas from a man's perspective, it was, or at least from my perspective, was I was spending so much time working these long hours and like, hey, the reason, the why behind it was I was doing it for you. But then that's not what my partner wanted. It was like, if you could fucking work 1 hour a day, but if you're not, or 100 hours a day, but if you're not present, then I don't want you.
Exactly. And you can't guess at what is important. I mean, that makes sense. You're working hard. You're busting your butt off to provide a home or nice dinners or financial resources, whatever the case may be. What else more can I do? But for that person, that wasn't the most important thing for them. Yeah. And so, there's so much variability between women, between men, in what turns them on, what their needs are, what makes them feel intimate, because everybody brings their past experiences to the table, right? And so, for some women, their needs may be more physical or maybe financial, whereas for other women, it may just be they want someone to talk to. They want someone, that kind of companionship. But the important part is that you're open to learning. Ask the question. Don't assume that just because your last partner wanted this, that it holds for every partner thereafter.
Shocker, people are different.
Yeah.
There's another thing that I thought would be interesting to dive into, which is on different forms of actual intimacy. And I have a couple friends who have talked to me about how they are in the bedroom with the women that they've been with. And it's has to relate to masculine and feminine energy and really stepping into each of those. And they have more dominant or it's not BDSM type stuff, but it's more like physical and aggressive in the bedroom. And there's a psychological component I'm curious about, which is that the way that my friend was describing this is that he steps so deeply into his masculine core, this strength, and has sex with his partner, and then it allows her to really release into her feminine energy. And I'm just curious, like psychologically, like what is going on in that realm?
Yeah, well, again, that's a couple that works for. For other couples, it may be the total opposite. The male may not want to have to be masculine in the sexual scenario because he's so masculine in his job. And same for women. Some women want to be passive. Women want to be more dominant.
Yeah.
And so, it's hard to say what's going on. It's individual preferences. It's how you are in the rest of your life that maybe you want to break from it. Maybe that's what you feel comfortable in that role. Maybe you want to switch things up. And a lot of it has to do with past sexual experiences as well. That plays into how you want to be treated sexually currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was thinking another thing back to what you were saying on how to maintain the spice, I guess you could call it, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
But it seems that in long-term relationships, often folks grow lazy, or at least men oftentimes will grow complacent, and then it'll be 6 months down the line, 8 months, a year, whatever it is, 5 years, and there's no date nights anymore. You kind of just show up, and then you do expect the thing. So
yeah, I mean, it's hard not to fall into that pattern.
Yeah.
The longer you've been together, the more likely that happens, because you establish a relationship that works and that is arousing to both of you, or satisfying to each other, or let's say, and then you keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And then if you're together long enough, it's very predictable. It's not bad, but it's a little bit boring.
Yeah.
And absolutely, my research for over 25 years has shown that for women, activating the sympathetic nervous system is a huge boost to sexual arousal. So for a long, long time, women were told, to have a good sexual experience, you got to calm down, you got to take a bubble bath, listen to some soft music, get very chill before sex. And my research shows just the opposite.
Yeah.
No, you got to run around the block and get activated and get things moving. And so, predictability is, not going to get you that excited. But if you go out and do something new and invigorating, or go ride a motorcycle, or go a roller coaster, or go to a horror movie, or something activating, and then bring it in to the bedroom, that's going to jazz things up a bit, So it's hard to do, but definitely couples need to keep that in mind. That variety does enhance sexual pleasure. And then another thing I was going to talk about, because of the sex difference in men and women, that sometimes as we age, the gap gets even wider, is the notion of, which you brought up, which is scheduling sexual dates. Because what we often see, if there's a mismatch in drive between partners, and it's not always the men that has a higher sex drive, but what we find is that if there's a mismatch in sex drive, then sex becomes a source of conflict. It's like you're arguing about sex. There's complaints that one partner's not getting it enough and the other's getting it too much, and so how do you make that work if there's differences in desire? And what often happens is, sex becomes a source of conflict, and that spills over into other acts of intimacy. So the person with a higher sex drive stops cuddling up on the couch, because when they cuddle up on the couch, their partner thinks they're trying to have sex with them, and so they kind of reject them. And vice versa, the person with the lower sex drive stops holding hands or doing acts of intimacy because they're worried that it's going to give a sign that they want to have sex, right? And so if you just take that worry out of it, or wondering, am I going to have sex tonight, or am I going to be rejected again tonight, or like, now it's been 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, it's been 2 weeks, it's been a month since we have sex, and then the tension builds up and it becomes such a negative thing in the relationship, that if you can just have a conversation with your partner and say, look, you want sex this much. I want sex this much. Let's agree on this much. And let's actually make sex dates so that the next time we have sex is going to be, next Tuesday at noon. And that way, it just takes the worry out of it. It takes the anxiety out of it. It takes the fear that other acts of intimacy will be misjudged or misread and lead to conflict. And it sounds terribly unromantic, but it works. And it also works because then if it's like next Tuesday you're going to have sex, you kind of plan for it. And my research has shown that sexual anticipation increases testosterone levels in women. And so you're going to get a bit of a boost of testosterone, and maybe you can, during the week, before that Tuesday noon sex, you're going to talk about, where should we go? Should we go somewhere nice for lunch? Can we make something special of it? And so it's, short of trying to change the underlying biology of one or the other, practical solutions like this actually work.
Yeah, as you were saying this, an immediate question that was going to push back is, doesn't that ruin the intimacy, or the excitement around it? But then I'm thinking,
no, it can have the opposite effect.
Yeah,
you would encourage them to, think about it, plan it, make something special about it.
Yeah, because it sounds like it could also be something fun where it's like, ooh, when's it gonna happen? Like it's scheduled for noon, but then the setting could be different at the time.
Yeah. But then it takes the conflict out of it and the worry about when is the next time gonna happen.
Do partners need to have a similar sex drive? Like if it's such a huge gap, is that an issue?
Yeah, it's an issue, and sometimes it's very hard to predict, because what we find is at the beginning of a relationship, that newness that is very much filled with sexual energy. Hormones are flowing. There's oxytocin, dopamine, all these feel-good hormones, and it makes you want to have sex. So there's a lot of sex that happens in that initial stage of the relationship. And so levels of desire are kind of artificially inflated, right? And that lasts, it's different for different people, but generally by 6 months it changes. So by that time you're already connected and in love with the person, some of the time, and you're committed to them. And then that exciting period, which is, there's also like this hormone that is released early on in this anticipatory phase of relationships that is very close cousin to amphetamine. So it's really like you're on a drug high. And then when that fades over time, and for some people they think, the thrill is gone, I need to move on. They're kind of addicted to that stage. But that's when your real levels of desire kind of are revealed. So what I'm getting at here is you may not always know if you're well matched in desire, because you might be at the beginning, all you're doing is having sex and thinking about sex and staring into each other's eyes and making baby talk, and like, thank God that doesn't last forever. We all would have died off as a species long ago, right? We wouldn't have lived long enough to reproduce. So yeah, when there's mismatches in sex drive, and that's usually with heterosexual couples, not always, but if two gay men and lesbian women are probably better matched on sex drive, because you got the women's sex drive and the men's sex drive, and if you plot it out, who's having the most sex? Gay men, heterosexual couples, lesbian couples, the frequency of sex. And it's because it's kind of like it's the woman putting the brakes on it, right? And not always. I will say, if we plot out sexual frequency, all the literature shows for men and women, however you want to measure sexual desire, they're like bell-shaped curves that are overlapping. So that means there's a proportion of women who have much higher sex drive than a proportion of men. But if you're looking at mean differences, that's what I'm talking about. So yeah, you can't always predict it, and then you have to find a solution for that. And I mean, it's only problematic, and it only becomes clinically diagnosable as a low desire, clinically relevant problem if it causes distress. So, if you both have low drive, or you have low enough drive that you only have sex once a month and you're both happy with it, some people might say, oh, that's pretty infrequent, especially if you're 20, 30. But if you're happy, great, it's not a problem. It becomes problematic when there's this mismatch. And then, there has to be either a compromise, or if the person with low desire, if there's a reason for it, meaning maybe they have extraordinarily low testosterone levels, that is a possibility. And that could be for men or women. And sometimes testosterone replacement therapy works for them. It's certainly FDA approved for men, not for women, but many physicians are writing prescriptions for it to be compounded at local pharmacies at very low doses, like less than a tenth of the dose that you would prescribe to men. But there are reports that it's beneficial for women's sex drive. But then, short of that, it's looking at, well, why don't I want to have sex as much as you do? Is there something about what we're doing sexually? Is there something about our relationship? And, there's just endless possibilities. That's why exploring acts of intimacy, what makes you want to have sex. Let's do more of those things to maximize the chances that you're going to enjoy the sexual scenario, and you're not just doing it out of a sense of duty or obligation.
Mm-hmm. Wow. There's so many. My head is going to so. No, it's
too
so
many.
No. It's so fascinating, and my questions are coming up as I'm hearing you, and I think other scenarios that are coming up, and kind of just things that I'm just curious about. I want to spitball to you if you're okay with that.
Sure.
But there's a couple phrases that I hear about. One that is common after breakups. I don't know. I'm sure you've heard this before, but the fastest way to get over someone is to get under someone.
Right.
So does that test out in the lab, or is there any science behind this?
I don't think there's any science behind that. That was one of the quotes in our book where a woman said the quickest way to get over one man is to get under another one.
Yeah.
And sure, that if you can kind of, for some women, it's transferring the feelings, but if you're talking about how to get over a breakup, what's the fastest way? Oh boy, there's so many variables in there. It depends on if you were in a long-term relationship, if you were financially dependent, if you have kids together, if you share friends and family. Well, it's going to take a lot longer to get over it because your lives are so much enmeshed. You've built a life together, and now it's not just the person that you're missing, it's the whole scenario, right? And then, of course, it has to do with, did you initiate the breakup or did they? If they broke it up, then a lot of people suffer because of low self-esteem and wondering, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? Regrets are not nice to have. So there's, how do you get over a breakup? Well, time heals. And certainly doing things like spending time with friends, having fun in situations that are not situations that you would do with your partner. So you're not, having this memory of, oh, last time I was here, we did this or whatever. So again, trying new things, distracting yourself with activities with friends, and just,
Yeah.
I mean, what can I say? Try to learn from it as best you can.
When I asked my mom that question when I first had heartbreak, she's a biologist, so she gave me a very practical answer.
Oh, what did she say?
She described it as like humans group in these little communities that are just circles. And she's like, you're in this little circle, and all you have to do is just pull yourself out of it and go to another circle. And it wasn't any like wishy-washy. It was so practical. And
I like that.
Cutthroat with it. I was like, oh, well, that's not the answer I expected, Mom, but like, I guess it works that way. So, it was really funny.
But to pull yourself out of your whole circle of friends and affiliates and everything, and just point yourself somewhere new. So there's no association.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it was a very like this is how you would do it on a
I see.
neurological level, and like if you wanted to do it, then you just pick yourself up, and like there's a different circle and go into it. Yeah.
Okay. So at a practical level, it would mean doing different things that don't
Exactly.
trigger those memories of
Exactly.
doing this with your partner.
And maybe not as feasible for most, because like you were saying, is that if you have so many things that are attached to that partner, it can be quite difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's because you always hear these phrases, and it's like, do these things check out? Like, so it's interesting to hear that. And another one I had was on sexual peak. I think this is an interesting one that I've understood more. Kind of what is sexual peak, and then does it differ between sexes on the age that sexual peak occurs?
Right. Yeah, well, you hear about that in the literature a lot, that men peak in their 20s and women peak in their 30s. What does that really mean? It means that testosterone is highest in men in their 20s, so their sex drive is like way, way up there. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about sexual energy, performance, strength of erection, being able to have, multiple erections in a short period of time, a very short recovery or refractory period, all of that is related to youth in men. So by peaking, they'll have the best erections, the strongest erections, the shortest recovery time, and they'll have the highest sex drive in their 20s. Does that mean they're having the best sex? That's questionable, not necessarily. And then women peaking more likely in their 30s, what does that have to do with? Well, it simply has to do with sexual experience. And a woman in her 20s isn't as sexually experienced, for the most part, as women in their 30s. And as I was saying earlier, particularly with orgasm, women need to learn what feels good to be able to have an orgasm. You need a high level of arousal to attain orgasm. And so by the time a woman's in her 30s, chances are she's engaged in masturbation. She's, had different partners, so she's learned different things about her body, what feels good, what doesn't. And she's also more confident to be able to express her needs. Like there's a relation between education level and sexual satisfaction and performance in women. Well, what is that about? Well, all it is about is that the more educated you are, the more likely you are to have read or had the resources on how to enjoy sex or how to attain, sexual pleasure. So this peaking has, in men, if we're talking about peaking in the 20s, it's all biology, and their body is peaking sexually. And for women, it's more knowledge, confidence in how to attain sexual pleasure.
That's so fascinating. And does IQ affect the amount of sexual the amount of times that someone engages in sexual activity?
No, I mean, I don't know of any research that has measured IQ, but, education level has been studied, and that, as I said, is related, but it's likely explained by just more resources and information. Now, maybe that changed now because so much information's on the internet, but then it's also like, what do you believe and what don't you believe? And, it's overwhelming. There's so much bad information out there, so you have to know how to find the good information, the reliable information.
Yeah, actually, on that note, are there any common myths about sexual desire that you like to dispel that are kind of in the ether that are false?
Well, I guess one thing worth mentioning maybe is just this notion of spontaneous desire, where suddenly, you have the urge to have sex. And that's based on a male model that happens to men sometimes, and I think partly it can be explained by anatomical differences between men and women. I can get into that in just a moment. But women don't really have that spontaneous sexual urges, except for very early on in a sexual relationship, like I was talking about, that infatuation stage. And so for women, oftentimes, instead of the classic sexual response cycle where we see desire precedes arousal precedes orgasm, often for women it's the reverse. Arousal precedes desire. So women are more likely to just kind of be in a sexual neutrality state where they can, sort of take it or leave it. And then their partner or maybe approaches them, touches them in a way that is appealing to them, and it starts to trigger a physical response or a feel-good response that is interpreted as sexual, and then they desire sex. And so a lot of women think, well, what's wrong with me? I never think about sex. I don't just all of a sudden want to have sex. There must be something wrong with me. And it's like, no, that's, kind of.
It's pretty normal.
That's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's normal for women.
It's super interesting. It feels like a lot of sexual liberation comes from releasing of shame. And in both men and women. But
sure.
Perhaps it's more with women, it seems like, because there's so much.
Well, women are more
socialized,
and I guess maybe this also boils all back down to evolutionarily. Women have to be more protectors of their sexuality, and so women are, taught to, don't give away sex. Protect your sexuality, and women aren't. My generation of women aren't taught to look at their genitals or to, it's like...
Yeah, it's a no-go zone.
No-go zone. Yeah. Whereas men, on the other hand, they have a close relationship with their genitals. Men, as little boys, touch their genitals because they use their penis to urinate. So they're very comfortable with their genitals. They kind of have a relationship with it. It's also, anatomically, it's more prominent. Women's tucked away. So what does this mean? Well, for men... they're more likely to notice. It's a much stronger response, so they'll notice if blood is flowing into their genitals. It'll rub against their clothing and trigger sexual thought, and so that there's more opportunities for their genitals to give the signal to want to have sex than for women, because they're like tucked away and they're not.
It's not as obvious.
Yeah.
Is there science around the action of cheating for both men and women in terms of the reason behind it?
I'm sure there is. I'm not so up on that literature. I mean, cheating, one whole side of it, there's the evolutionary side of it. Why would women cheat? Well, one is to secure the good genes during ovulation, and then settle with the dad who's going to take care of it. So there's cuckolding, right? There's also just simply for variety, to decrease boredom, for all the reasons that a person may not be fulfilled in their relationship. It's not just about the sex. Maybe their partner doesn't make them feel sexy or feel masculine or feel, whatever is important to them. So they seek out to be fulfilled in those ways elsewhere.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And it's I know I'm asking all these broad general things and like, hey, give me a broad sweeping answer, but it's like, okay, come on, man. It depends on case by case
I know.
basis.
I keep saying it depends. It depends. We know that men have more affairs than do women, and we know that men and women who stray, men stray with more partners than do women, and we know that it's more likely that women fall in love with the partner they have an affair with. Another whole reason to have an affair is to kind of, it's almost like mate insurance, so kind of keep someone on the sidelines in case, your mate dies or leaves you or, any number of reasons, then you have someone else waiting to take their place, kind of thing.
That's another common thing that I often hear is at least only specifically with women, is it's like she always knows who's next.
Yeah. More so than men do. Yes. Yes.
And it's for the sake, I guess, because that could be traced back to the same thing of evolutionarily as its protection or security.
That as well. Also, the research shows that women see breakups coming sooner than do men. So it may be that they're more aware that this relationship may not be forever.
Mm-hmm.
I need to get the next one lined up.
Yeah, I think the one of the things I'm always continuously impressed by is like the emotional attunement that women have. Like I'll be in situations and I'll feel like a little bit of I'll be a little bit tense, and then someone from across the room will be like, "Hey, Robert, why are you so tense?" I'm like, how the fuck did you notice this? Like, so like the emotional attunement is amazing.
I know it's a
really
blessing
cool.
and a curse. Don't wish for it.
No, but it's so cool. A lot of these conversations, like I think sometimes they get pushed back whenever I want to engage in these conversations, but they're from a point of like life is so much better when men and women coexist. Like it's not meant to be like two armies. So like it's always from a point of curiosity of, okay, if you understand the other person better, you understand yourself, and then how you can show up, and then two parts can come to make a whole, and it just makes a much better relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm curious from your position working in academia, there seems to have been this point in which sharing scientific truths sometimes was met with maybe something that didn't agree with maybe the status quo in culture, if that makes sense. And then I'm curious if you've ever felt, I don't know if afraid is the right word, but maybe sharing biological truths in today's setting.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not an evolutionary psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist, but I do find evolutionary theory fascinating. So I've published on it, written on it. And that upsets people because it seems so deterministic. And so, I don't want to think that I'm just programmed to do this. And I'm not so wedded to evolutionary theory that I think it plays a massive role in our sexuality, but I do think it influences it. And I do think it can understand some of our sexual attraction, some of our differences in desire. I think it plays in. But yeah, people don't like to hear those types of explanations. They don't like to hear that there's a lot of evidence of an underlying difference in drive mechanisms between men and women. But, I mean, the data doesn't lie if there are enough studies and you look at it. And so I think it's better to know that and understand that and okay, kind of accept that. Then you can say, well, it's not just me, it's not just my partner, it's every man and woman who are coupled that chances are they're going to experience this at some point in their lives, many of them. And so how do we make that work? We can't just all, move on to the next one. Same thing will happen over time.
Same problem will come back, yeah.
Yeah. So let's find solutions and let's talk about these differences. Let's not try to convince each other that, men are from Mars and women are from... No, we're all from the same planet, but we're made a little differently. But on the most part, we still need each other. It's still it's not that we're so evolved that women don't need men and men don't need women for different tasks. Men are still stronger and can help carry the garbage out, and women are good organizers and nesters, and they make a nice household. And together we benefit from those things. I mean, it sounds kind of silly what I'm saying, but yeah, there's lots of reasons to want to keep together and to make any differences in sexuality work out through communication and compromise and increasing in variety and learning more about each other to find some things that maybe I've been with my partner 20 years. I didn't know that this was so important to you. Of all the things I do for you in the day, and this is the one thing that really fits in your brain as I'm showing love to you. Like you hear that a lot among couples who've been together for a while.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you have those conversations, because then it's like, oh, why didn't you tell me? And it's like, oh, well, we never had that. And but like the other side is so receptive.
Exactly.
Typically. So it's kind of like a communal relief. But I think it only sounds silly because I think there's a lot of resistance to it. And then, yeah, folks resist maybe the thought that there is this programming. But from every time that I've misunderstood something about like a drive or something internally within me, the script was like, yo, like what is wrong with me? What's going on in here? But then when I start to break it down, like I said this on a recent episode, I went from Bali, as I was saying, which is I was driving around, in my shorts without a shirt in the tropical weather, and I went to Bucharest and it was snowing. I was like, what? In the same month, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And so I was clogged. My nose was really clogged. I was stuffy and everything, and I was just like, why am I getting all stuffy and everything? And then as soon as I understood the mechanism behind the I was okay with it.
Yeah. So understanding it's not something wrong with me, and that I'm not the only person experiencing this. And yeah.
No, it's so nice because it and then again it just brings the point of like, okay, hey, the point is to connect. We can connect deeper.
Yeah.
Is there anything today that you didn't that we didn't touch on that you wanted to discuss?
Oh gosh, I've been going on and off target so many times. I can't think of anything offhand.
No, I think it was so helpful. There's questions that I'd scripted that we covered, and then a couple ones that came in that I'm glad that I was like, oh shit,
good.
I probably would want to ask this at another point. So I'm glad I remembered. But last one here for you is, how would you like to be remembered?
When I die? Oh my gosh. Okay. I would like to be remembered as someone who contributed to the knowledge base of bettering the sex lives of women in some meaningful way. I mean, I've published many papers, and that feels good. But my biggest accomplishment is really I haven't given birth biologically, but I've given academic birth to 15 amazing students who I've handpicked from different parts of the country in, U.S. and Canada, and have seen them through a PhD, and they are all now doing really great things. So that's kind of my intellectual DNA that I've passed along, and they're passing on now to their students. So that feels good. So yeah, someone who's played a role, like Helen Singer Kaplan, like Sandra Lieblam, like, many of the greats in my time and before my time, Masters and Johnson, who have done something that have led to a betterment of sexuality for women, sexuality and relationships at large.
Yeah, well, you've definitely made an imprint on me.
Oh, well, so, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and thank you so much for all the back and forth that we had, and
it's
making the
fun.
time. Yeah, really fun. And this was super informative. And I'm sure as I reflect on it, I'll have tons of questions in my head as well that come up. So I might be emailing you.
No problem. Happy to answer.